The scent of rain-soaked earth and pine was the only calendar Elara needed. It was the smell of late autumn, of the world hunkering down for the long sleep of winter. In her small, isolated cottage, this was a time of quiet preparation. She stacked the last of the split firewood against the stone wall, her movements economical and practiced. Inside, a pot of rabbit stew simmered over the hearth, filling the single room with the comforting aroma of thyme and root vegetables. Her life was a circle of these small, essential tasks. It was a good life, a peaceful one. And yet, in the quiet moments between chores, a hollow ache would sometimes surface, a feeling of profound loss for something she couldn't name. It was like a phantom limb, a memory of a memory that had been scoured away, leaving only a scar of absence. 2 years. That's how long she'd been here. She'd woken up in this cottage, a bundle in her arms and a gaping void in her mind. The bundle had been Leo, her son, tiny and mewling. The void was everything before that moment. She had no past, no family, no name but the one she'd given herself. Elara. The woman in the nearby village who had helped her in those first bewildering weeks had said she was found wandering the edge of the woods, dazed and unresponsive. They assumed she was a refugee from the border skirmishes, another soul displaced by the endless conflicts of the shifting territories. Elara accepted the story. It was as good as any other. All that mattered was Leo. He was her sun, her moon, her entire sky. Now, at almost 2 years old, he was a whirlwind of clumsy energy and bright, curious eyes. His hair was the color of dark honey, his laughter the only music she ever needed. He was hers, entirely hers. A sharp rap on the heavy oak door startled her. No one ever came to the cottage. It was too remote, set deep in the whisperwood, a place most folks avoided. She scooped Leo into her arms, his small body warm and solid against hers. Her heart hammered a nervous rhythm against her ribs. She opened the door a crack, peering out. The man standing on her doorstep blotted out the gray afternoon light. He was immense, a monolith of muscle and grim authority, clad in dark leather and wolf pelts. His hair was the black of a starless night, pulled back from a face carved from granite. But it was his eyes that held her captive. They were the color of molten gold, and they burned into her with an intensity that felt like a physical blow. It was a look of such raw, agonizing possession that she felt the air leave her lungs. He said nothing. He just looked. He looked at her face, her hair, the way her hand trembled on the door frame. It wasn't a leer, not the predatory gaze she'd sometimes encountered from trappers or woodsmen. This was different. It was a look of discovery, of an impossible prayer answered. It was a look that said, "There you are." Fear warred with a bizarre, terrifying flicker of recognition. It was like seeing a mountain from a dream, unfamiliar, yet known in some deep, inaccessible part of her soul. "Can I help you?" she finally managed, her voice thin. The man's jaw tightened, a muscle feathering along the hard line. His gaze dropped from her face to the child in her arms. Leo, who was usually shy with strangers, did something extraordinary. He wriggled, not in fear, but in excitement. He reached out a chubby hand, his fingers grasping at the air, and made a soft, gurgling sound of pure welcome. The giant's composure cracked. For a fleeting second, his stony expression dissolved into one of profound, heart-stopping pain. It was the look of a man who had been starved and was finally seeing a feast. He took a half step forward, his hand lifting as if to touch the boy, before he visibly restrained himself, clenching his hand into a fist at his side. "My name is Kalen," he said. His voice was a low rumble, like stones grinding together deep underground. It vibrated through the wood of the door, through the soles of her feet. "I am the Alpha King of the Northern Reach." Alara's mind went blank. The Alpha King. Here, at her derelict cottage on the edge of nowhere. It made no sense. Kings did not make social calls on nameless women with forgotten pasts. "Your Majesty," she whispered, instinctively dropping into a clumsy curtsy while still holding Leo. I don't understand." "I have been looking for you," he said, his golden eyes locking back onto hers. The words were simple, yet they carried the weight of a lifetime. "For 2 years." She shook her head, a gesture of pure, uncomprehending denial. "You're mistaken. I've been here. I don't know anyone." "You know me," he stated, not as a question, but as an undeniable fact. "You just don't remember." Leo squirmed again, more insistently this time, and before Elara could stop him, he launched himself from her arms. He didn't fall. He tumbled forward, landing on his feet with the uncanny balance of a toddler, and toddled directly toward the terrifying king. He stopped at the man's massive, leather-clad legs, looked up, and placed his small hand flat against the king's knee. The world seemed to hold its breath. Elara's heart stopped. King Kalen did not move. He simply stared down at the small boy, touching him with such innocent trust. A tremor went through his powerful frame. He slowly, deliberately knelt. He lowered himself onto one knee in the damp earth, bringing his formidable presence down to the level of a child. He was still a mountain, but now he was a mountain a boy could climb. He didn't speak. He didn't touch Leo. He just watched him, his fierce gaze softening with an emotion so raw and vulnerable it made Elara's throat ache. And in that moment, as the great Alpha King knelt in the mud before her son, Elara knew one thing with terrifying certainty. Her quiet, peaceful life was over. He did not leave. He didn't demand entry or offer any further explanation. He simply made it clear he was staying. 2 of his guards, equally imposing men with the same unnervingly intense eyes, appeared from the trees. They set up a discreet camp a stone's throw from the cottage, their presence a silent, unyielding perimeter. Kalen himself took up a vigil on her porch. He sat on the top step, his back against a post, a greatsword resting across his lap. He didn't speak to her, didn't ask for food or shelter. He just sat, watching the forest as twilight bled into night, a guardian she hadn't asked for and didn't understand. Elara spent the evening in a state of suspended panic. She fed Leo, bathed him in their small tin tub, and put him to bed in his cot, all with mechanical movements. Her mind raced, trying to piece together the impossible, the Alpha King looking for her. "You know me," the words echoed, pulling at the edges of the blank canvas of her past. But there was nothing there, only a dizzying emptiness. She risked a glance out the small window. His silhouette was a dark, unmoving shape against the deepening indigo of the sky. He was as still as the ancient oaks surrounding them, a creature of patience and absolute purpose. Why? What could he possibly want with her? She was nobody, a woman with no name, no connections, no power. The next morning, she found a freshly dressed deer on her porch. It was laid cleanly on a bed of ferns, a silent offering. There was no sign of the king. She hesitated for only a moment before her practical nature took over. It was a gift of good meat that would last them for weeks. She spent the morning butchering it, her hands sure and steady, a skill she hadn't known she possessed until she'd needed it. When she was finished, she took a bowl of the hot stew from the night before and walked out onto the porch. Kalen was there again, in the same spot, his golden eyes tracking the flight of a hawk high above. She stopped a few feet away, holding the bowl. "Your Majesty?" He turned his head. That gaze pinned her, stripping away all her defenses. "You should eat," she said, her voice barely a whisper. She thrust the bowl toward him. He looked at the bowl, then back at her. For a long moment, he did nothing. She thought he would refuse, that her humble offering was an insult. Then slowly he reached out and took it from her. His calloused fingers brushed against hers, and a jolt, hot and electric, shot up her arm. She snatched her hand back as if burned. A ghost of a memory flickered behind her eyes, the same touch, a warm hand enlacing hers, the scent of pine and something else, something uniquely masculine and safe. It was gone as quickly as it came, leaving her breathless and confused. He ate the stew in silence, his movements efficient. He didn't compliment it, but he finished every last drop. When he was done, he held the empty bowl out to her. "Why are you here?" she asked, her courage bolstered by his acceptance of her food. "To protect you," he answered simply. "Protect me from what? No one knows I'm here. No one is looking for me." "You are wrong," he said, his voice low and certain. They never stopped looking. A chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air washed over her. "Who is they?" He looked away, his gaze sweeping the forest again. "The ones who took you from me." The words hung between them, heavy with unspoken history. He spoke of a life she couldn't access, a danger she couldn't comprehend. She wanted to press him, to demand answers, but the raw grief in his voice silenced her. This wasn't a king making a proclamation. It was a man confessing a wound. Over the next few days, a strange rhythm established itself. Kalen and his guards were a constant, silent presence. They never intruded, but their watchfulness was absolute. The king chopped a mountain of firewood, enough for 2 winters, the rhythmic thud of his axe echoing through the woods. He reinforced the roof of her cottage, his large hands surprisingly deft. He hunted, leaving fresh game on her porch each morning. He never asked for anything in return. He performed these tasks with a quiet, focused intensity. It wasn't charity, it wasn't pity. It felt deliberate. It felt like he was rebuilding a world around her, shoring up her defenses, while she remained oblivious to the war he was fighting on her behalf. She found herself watching him. She watched the way he moved, with a predator's contained grace. She watched the way his eyes would soften almost imperceptibly whenever he looked at Leo. Her son, for his part, was utterly captivated by the king. He would follow Kalen around the small yard, babbling happily, and Kalen would speak to him in that low, rumbling voice, answering the child's nonsensical questions with solemn gravity. One afternoon, Leo tripped and fell, scraping his knee. His wail was sharp and immediate. Before Elara could even get off the porch, Kalen was there. He swept the crying child up into his massive arms, cradling him against his broad chest. "Hush, little wolf," Kalen murmured, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. He held Leo's small hand, his thumb stroking the back of it. "You are brave. You are strong." Leo's sobs subsided into hiccups. He rested his head on the king's shoulder, his eyes fixed on Elara. She watched them, a man of impossible power and a small, trusting child, and the ache in her chest intensified. They looked right together. They looked like they belonged. The thought was so disloyal to the life she had built, the identity she had forged for herself, that she immediately pushed it away. But the seed of doubt had been planted. Her life was quiet, yes, but was it whole? That night, a storm rolled in. Wind howled through the trees, and rain lashed against the cottage. Leo was restless, whimpering in his sleep. Elara sat by the fire, pulling a blanket tighter around her shoulders, listening to the storm and the even more unsettling storm inside her own mind. A loud crash from outside sent her jumping to her feet. It sounded like a large branch, or perhaps a whole tree, had come down. She ran to the window, peering into the maelstrom. She couldn't see anything through the sheeting rain. The door burst open. Kalen stood there, drenched and formidable, the wind tearing at his cloak. "You can't stay here," he said, his voice cutting through the roar of the storm. "It's not safe. A tree fell, blocking the path. If they come, you'll be trapped." "They?" she cried, her voice rising in panic. "Who are they?" He strode into the room, bringing the scent of rain and ozone with him. His golden eyes were blazing. "There's no time. Gather the boy. We're moving to the caves." He didn't wait for her agreement. He went to Leo's cot and gently lifted her sleeping son, wrapping him securely in his own thick, dry wolf pelt cloak. Leo stirred for a moment, then settled again, safe in the king's embrace. Kaelin looked at her. Elara. Her name on his lips was not a request. It was an anchor in the storm. She didn't understand what was happening, but looking at him, at the fierce determination in his face, at the gentle way he held her son, she knew she trusted him. It was an instinct that ran deeper than memory, a truth her body knew, even if her mind did not. She grabbed her own worn cloak and followed him out into the raging night. The world beyond her doorstep was a terrifying chaos of wind and darkness, but the king moved through it with an unshakable certainty, a shield against the storm. And as he led her into the woods, away from the only home she could remember, she felt not fear, but the faintest, most terrifying whisper of homecoming. The caves were a hidden network behind a waterfall, their entrance cloaked by mist and roaring water. Inside it was dry and surprisingly warm. Kaelin's guards had already been at work. Torches flickered in iron sconces, casting dancing shadows on the stone walls. A fire was blazing in a natural hearth, and piles of dry furs were arranged as makeshift beds. Kaelin laid the still sleeping Leo down on the softest pile of furs, tucking the cloak around him with a tenderness that seemed at odds with his warrior's exterior. He then turned to Elara, his expression grim. "They will use the storm as cover," he said, his voice low. "A scout from the Blackwood Pack was spotted 2 days ago. It can't be a coincidence." Blackwood Pack? The name meant nothing to her, yet it sent a shiver of dread down her spine. "Your former pack," he said, the words clipped and harsh. "The pack your family led. The pack that betrayed you." Elara sank onto a nearby rock, her legs suddenly weak. "My family?" she whispered. The word felt foreign on her tongue. Kaelin's jaw clenched. He paced before the fire, his large frame radiating a restless, violent energy. "Your cousin, Lord Valerius. He was your betrothed. He wanted your power, the inheritance that should have been yours as the true alpha female of the line." Images, fragmented and sharp, flashed through Elara's mind. A man's face, handsome but with cruel eyes, a bitter argument in a firelit hall, the taste of wine, thick and strangely sweet. A feeling of dizziness, of the world tilting on its axis. I don't remember," she stammered, pressing her hands to her temples. "He and a hedge witch drugged you," Kaelin continued, his voice rough with a fury that seemed years old. "They performed a ritual to sever your memories, to fracture your spirit. They wanted to turn you into a docile puppet, an empty vessel to control. But they underestimated you. They underestimated us." He stopped pacing and looked at her, his golden eyes burning with a fire that seemed to hold back the darkness. "You were my mate. We were bound before the moon goddess a week before your cousin made his move. Leo, he is our son." The cave fell silent, the only sound the crackling of the fire and the distant roar of the waterfall. The world didn't just tilt, it shattered. Everything she thought she knew, her solitary existence, her nameless past, her son who was hers alone, was a lie. A carefully constructed prison of forgetting. "No," she breathed, shaking her head. It was too much, too vast. "It can't be." "Look at him," Kaelin said, his voice softening. He nodded toward the sleeping child. "He has your hair, but he has my eyes. Can't you see it? Can't you feel it?" She crawled over to the furs where Leo slept. She looked at her son, truly looked at him, for the first time. His long eyelashes, his button nose, the peaceful expression on his face, and his scent. Underneath the familiar smell of milk and childhood, there was something else. A faint, clean aroma of pine and winter frost. the same scent that clung to the Alpha King. Her own scent, she realized with a jolt, was rain-soaked earth and wildflowers. They were a perfect complement, earth and sky, forest and storm. A sob escaped her, a dry, ragged sound. It was the sound of a dam breaking, of 2 years of nameless grief finally finding its source. The hollow ache in her chest wasn't just a feeling, it was the shape of him. It was Kaelan-shaped. He came to her then, kneeling beside her on the stone floor. He didn't touch her. He just waited, giving her space to break, to feel the cataclysm of her own returning past. "Why couldn't I remember you?" she asked, her voice choked with tears. "The witch's magic was strong. It targeted our bond. She tried to erase me from your soul," he explained, his voice laced with venom. "But she failed. It held. Your spirit was too strong. You escaped them before they could complete the ritual, but the spell shattered your memory as you fled. I have hunted Valerius and his witch for 2 years. I have torn apart every shadow in this kingdom looking for you." Suddenly, one of the guards appeared at the cave mouth, his face grim. "My king. They're here. 3 of them, moving up the riverbed." Kaelan was on his feet in an instant, his entire demeanor shifting from grieving mate to ruthless king. He drew the greatsword from the sheath on his back, the sound of steel on leather unnaturally loud in the enclosed space. "Stay here with the boy," he commanded Elara. "Do not leave this cave." He turned to leave, but Elara grabbed his arm. "Kaelan." He stopped, looking down at her hand on his leather-clad forearm. It was the first time she had touched him willingly, the first time she'd said his name. His golden eyes met hers, and in their depths she saw 2 years of unrelenting hope and despair. "Be careful," she whispered. A flicker of a smile, so faint it was barely there, touched his lips. "For you?" he said, "always." Then he was gone, melting into the darkness with his guards, leaving her alone with her son and the wreckage of her rediscovered past. She huddled by the fire, Leo still sleeping peacefully, oblivious. The sounds of a fight reached her from outside, the clash of steel, guttural snarls that were not entirely human, a cry of pain cut brutally short. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through her shock. This was her fault. This danger had found them because of her. A figure stumbled through the waterfall at the cave's entrance. It wasn't Kaelan. It was a man she now recognized with a sickening clarity. Valerius. His handsome face was contorted in a mask of fury and desperation. His arm was bleeding, and he held a long, cruel-looking knife. "There you are, cousin," he sneered, his eyes wild. "Did you really think he could protect you forever? The boy. Give me the boy." Elara scrambled backward, shielding Leo with her body. "Stay away from him." "He is the key," Valerius raved, advancing on her. "His blood carries the full strength of the line, untainted. With him, I can claim the Alpha seat by right of blood. The witch said so." He lunged. Time seemed to slow down. As his shadow fell over her, something inside Elara, a core of power she never knew existed, erupted. It wasn't a conscious thought. It was pure, primal instinct. The instinct of a mother protecting her child, the instinct of an alpha female protecting her own. She didn't scream. She didn't move. She simply willed. From the damp earth of the cave floor, thick, thorny vines erupted. They snaked around Valerius's legs, pulling him down. The stone walls seemed to groan, and roots, thick as a man's arm, burst forth, wrapping around his torso, his arms pinning him. The very air grew heavy, thick with the scent of loam and growing things. She could feel the life force of every plant, every insect, every drop of water in the cave, and it was all answering to her. Valerius struggled, his eyes wide with shock and terror. "What is this? This isn't possible. The spell was supposed to break you." "You didn't break me," Elara said, her voice low and resonant with a power that shocked her. You just made me forget who I am." The roots tightened, and Valerius cried out. At that moment, Kalen appeared at the entrance, his sword dripping. He took in the scene. Valerius ensnared by the earth, Elara kneeling protectively over their son, her eyes glowing with a faint green light. He stopped, his face a mask of pure awe. He wasn't looking at the trapped enemy. He was looking at her. He was seeing the full, untamed power of his mate, unleashed at last. The power that Valerius had tried to steal, the power that the witch had tried to suppress. It hadn't been destroyed. It had only been sleeping. He walked slowly toward her, his golden eyes full of a reverence that humbled her. He knelt before her again, just as he had on her doorstep. He reached out, not to the vines or to Valerius, but to her. He gently brushed a stray lock of hair from her face. "My queen," he breathed, the words full of wonder and 2 long years of pain. "Welcome home." The journey back to the capital, Silverwood Citadel, was a blur of motion and emotion. They traveled in a guarded carriage, the rhythm of the horse's hooves, a steady beat marking the end of one life and the beginning of another. Kalen sat across from her, his presence filling the small space. He didn't press her with questions or overwhelm her with declarations. He simply watched her, his gaze a warm, steady anchor as her fractured memories began to knit themselves back together. Flashes of their life before became clearer. A shared meal in his private chambers, the feel of his hand in hers as they walked the castle battlements under a full moon. The low rumble of his laugh, a rare and precious sound. The sacred, secret ceremony where they had bound their souls together, their vows witnessed only by the ancient trees of the royal grove. They were not just memories of a king and his consort, they were the intimate, cherished moments of a man and a woman deeply in love. The love was still there, a powerful current running beneath the surface of her confusion. Leo sat between them, chattering happily, oblivious to the momentous shift in their world. He would often reach for Kalen, and Kalen would lift him onto his lap, holding his son with a natural ease that spoke of a deep, instinctual bond. Seeing them together healed a part of Elara she hadn't known was still broken. When they arrived at the Citadel, it was to a court buzzing with rumor and speculation. The return of the king was expected, but his companions, a plainly dressed woman and a small child, were a shock. Whispers followed them through the great stone halls. Elara felt the weight of hundreds of eyes, curious and critical. She saw the women of the court, dressed in silks and jewels, their expressions a mixture of disbelief and disdain. She clutched Leo tighter, a wave of the old insecurity washing over her. She was a woman from a remote cottage, dressed in homespun wool. How could she ever belong here? Kalen seemed to sense her unease. His large hand came to rest on the small of her back, a simple, proprietary gesture that silenced the whispers around them. It wasn't a gesture of comfort. It was a statement. She is with me. She is mine. He did not take her to a guest chamber. He led her directly to the royal wing, to a suite of rooms that was breathtaking in its simple elegance. There was a roaring fire in the hearth, and the main chamber opened onto a balcony overlooking the entire city. But it was the smaller adjoining room that made her gasp. It was a nursery, clearly prepared long ago.